What would you do if you found a child bleeding in the rain, and the only number in his pocket belonged to the most dangerous man in Montreal? That's exactly what happened to 22-year-old Dani Kowalski on a Thursday night that started like every other Thursday night of her life. Sore feet, a grease-stained apron, and $43 in tips stuffed into the front pocket of her jeans. Welcome back to Ella's Romance Library. If you're new here, stick around. And if you already know what we do here, you know this one is going to hurt in the best possible way. Hit that like button before we even get started, because I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll want to. Now, let's go back to that Thursday night. The rain in Montreal doesn't fall, it ambushes. It comes sideways off the St. Lawrence and hits you like a slap. And by the time you realize it's raining, you're already soaked through your jacket, and your shoes are making that specific squelching sound. That means the next 40 minutes of your walk home are going to be miserable. Dani Kowalski knew this walk well. She did it 5 nights a week, down Rue Saint-Denis to the corner of Rachel, cut through the park, past the closed pharmacy, and up the back stairs of the building on Boyer, where she rented a room from a woman named Giselle, who left passive-aggressive notes about the thermostat. She had her hood up and her head down. She was thinking about whether she'd remembered to defrost anything for dinner. She was not thinking about the small dark shape at the base of the park bench until she nearly tripped over it. She stopped. The shape was a boy, maybe 7 years old, maybe 8. He was wearing a navy blazer over a white dress shirt, the kind of outfit that costs more than Dani made in a week, and he was curled on his side in the mud at the foot of the bench, his cheek pressed against the wet ground, eyes closed. There was blood on his temple. Not a lot, but enough. Dani's first thought was, call 911. Her second thought came when she knelt beside him and felt for a pulse. Steady, thank God, steady. And noticed the way his fingers were clenched around something. She pried them gently open. A phone. Unlocked. The screen still glowing. And on the screen, a single contact entry pulled up as if he'd been trying to call before he lost consciousness. No name. Just a number with a Montreal area code, and below it, written in the notes field in the contact app, 4 words in a child's handwriting. If lost, call Papa. Dani looked at the boy. She looked at the street. She looked at the phone. She called 911 first. She described the location, described the boy, was told an ambulance was 8 minutes out. Then, because she was Dani Kowalski, and Dani Kowalski had never once in her 22 years of life made the safe choice, when a child needed help, she called Papa. The line rang twice. The voice that answered was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that means the person on the other end is very used to having complete silence around them whenever they speak. Not a question. A command. My name is Dani Kowalski, she said, and her voice only shook slightly. I'm in Park La Haye on Rachel. I found a little boy unconscious by one of the benches. He has a head wound. I've already called an ambulance. He was holding this phone, and there was a note that said to call you if he was lost, so I called you. Silence. Describe him. He's small, dark hair. He's wearing a navy blazer, white shirt, there's a crest on the pocket. I can't read it in the dark. Don't move. The line went dead. Dani sat back on her heels in the mud and looked at the unconscious child and thought, what did I just do? The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. 2 paramedics, efficient and kind, loaded the boy onto a stretcher. Dani gave her name, gave her account of finding him, answered every question they asked. She was halfway through, explaining that no, she didn't see anyone else in the park, when the black SUVs arrived. 3 of them. No plates she could see in the dark and rain. They stopped at the park entrance and 6 men got out moving fast, the kind of fast that looked calm on the surface and was absolutely not calm underneath. The man who got out last was not moving fast. He walked. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that the rain was hitting, and he didn't seem to notice. He wore a charcoal overcoat, no tie, collar open. He looked like the kind of man who had been interrupted in the middle of something important and had made the decision, somewhere between wherever he'd been and here, to set aside whatever emotion he might have felt and become very, very controlled instead. His name was Callum Vale, and if you lived in Montreal and moved in certain circles, or if you were unlucky enough to have caught the wrong kind of attention in this city, you already knew that name. Dani did not know that name. She found this out later. At the time, all she knew was that this man crossed the park in long, measured strides, went directly to the stretcher where his son lay, and stood there for a moment with his hand on the boy's face, not speaking. Then he straightened and looked at Danny. His eyes were gray, very gray, the kind of gray that made you feel like you were being read rather than looked at. "You found him," he said. "Yes, you called the ambulance, obviously." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, closer to recalibration. "Callum Vale," he said. "Danny Kowalski. Get in the car, Miss Kowalski." She looked at him. She looked at the 6 men standing at various points around the park, who were very carefully not looking at her. She looked at the SUVs. "I'll follow the ambulance myself," she said. "You don't have a car. I'll take the metro. There's no direct line to Hotel Dieu from here at this hour." She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. She hated that he was right. "Why do you need me in your car?" she said. "Because," Callum Vale said, and turned to walk back toward the SUVs. "You are the last person who saw my son before he lost consciousness, and I have questions." He didn't look back. 2 of the men moved to flank her, not threateningly, exactly, but in a way that made it very clear the conversation about the car was over. Danny got in the car. His son's name was Bastien. Sébastien Vale, called Bastien by everyone except the teachers at his school, who called him Sébastien, and the one uncle who called him Seb, and, Danny would later learn, a housekeeper named Mrs. Wymett who had called him Mon Petit Prince since he was 3 years old and had no intention of stopping. He was 7. He had been at an evening tutoring session 4 blocks from the park, a fact that Callum Vale's people confirmed within 10 minutes of getting in the cars, along with the confirmation that the tutor had sent Bastien out to the car. At pickup time, the driver had been 90 seconds late, pulling around, and in those 90 seconds Bastien had simply vanished. Vanished, Danny thought, and ended up face down in the park mud a block and a half away. She sat in the back of the SUV next to a man who radiated controlled fury like a furnace radiates heat. Steadily, without drama, almost invisible until you were close enough to feel it, and she answered his questions. Where exactly? What position? Whether she'd seen anyone leaving the park. Whether the boy had said anything. "He didn't say anything," she said. "He was unconscious when I found him, but he was breathing and his pulse was steady." "You checked his pulse." "I did a semester of nursing before I switched programs," she said. Old habit. Again that recalibration. Like she kept saying things he hadn't predicted. At the hospital, they took Bastien into assessment. Callum Vale stood outside the door and was informed, by a doctor who clearly found the experience very uncomfortable, that Bastien had a minor concussion, a 3-centimeter laceration on his right temple, and no other significant injuries. He had likely tripped and hit his head on the edge of the bench and lost consciousness. He was going to be fine. The doctor left quickly. Danny watched Callum Vale stand perfectly still for 10 seconds, and then turn away from the door and press his hand flat against the wall, head down. She looked away. Some moments aren't meant to be witnessed. After a moment he straightened, composed, immaculate, except for the fact that his coat was still wet. "You should go home," he said. "One of my men will drive you." "I'm fine," she said. "It's past midnight. I know what time it is." She didn't know why she was still here. She'd answered all his questions. Bastien was going to be fine. There was absolutely no reason for her to be standing in the corridor of Hotel Dieu Hospital at 12:14 in the morning, instead of going home to her cold apartment and the passive-aggressive thermostat notes. She stayed anyway. Here's what the people who feared Callum Vale understood about him. He did not make promises lightly. He did not say things he did not mean. And when Callum Vale said, "I will handle this," whatever this was ceased to exist as a problem. Here's what they also understood. The people he protected absolutely. His son, his sister, the handful of people in this city who had earned their place inside that circle. Danny Kowalski was about to find out, entirely against her will, what it meant to be inside that circle. It started the next morning, when a man knocked on the door of her apartment on Boyer at 8 a.m. and handed her an envelope. Inside the envelope was a card with a phone number and a brief, handwritten note. "For your time last night. CV." Inside the envelope below the card was more cash than Danny had made in 3 months. She put the card on her kitchen table and stared at it. Then she called the number. "You can't give me this," she said, when the line connected. "It's already been given," Callum Vale said. "I didn't help your son for money. I know that." "Then why?" "Because people who do things for the right reasons," he said, "should still have their rent paid." He hung up. Danny sat at her kitchen table for a long time. Then she put the cash in her dresser drawer, told herself she would figure out what to do with it later, and went to her shift at the diner. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. 3 days later, she was walking home from the same Thursday shift when a car pulled up beside her. Not threateningly, it slowed, kept pace with her, and the window rolled down. Bastien Vale was in the back seat with a white bandage on his temple, and he was staring at her with enormous dark eyes. "You're her," he said. Danny stopped walking. The car stopped. "You're the lady who found me," Bastien said. He said it with a kind of solemn certainty, like he was confirming a fact he'd been thinking about very carefully. "Papa told me." "Your dad told you about me?" "He told me you sat with me until the ambulance came and you checked if my heart was beating." He paused. "I wanted to say thank you." Danny looked at this small, serious child with his bandaged head and his impeccable manners and the ghost of some very frightening nights in his father's face that she could see behind the car window in the back seat, and something in her chest did a thing she couldn't quite name. "You're welcome, Bastien," she said. "How's your head?" "It's fine," he said. "That means it's healing. That's what Mrs. Imetz says too." The front passenger window rolled down. One of Callum Vale's men looked at her. "Mr. Vale would like to know if you'd be willing to have dinner," the man said. "He has something he'd like to discuss." Danny looked at Bastien. Bastien looked at Danny. "You should say yes," Bastien said very seriously. "Papa makes a reservation at the good places." Danny laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out startled and genuine, and Bastien's mouth curved up like he'd won something. "Fine," she said. The restaurant was on Sherbrooke, the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices, and every surface was a muted, expensive shade of cream. Callum Vale was already there when she arrived. He stood when she walked in. Old-fashioned manners. She hadn't expected that. Over dinner, which was excellent, Bastien had not lied about this. Callum Vale told her, with the careful economy of someone who had decided to say the minimum necessary amount and not one word more, that Bastien's concussion had not been an accident. Danny set down her fork. "What do you mean, not an accident?" "The tutor sent him out to the car," he said. "The car was 90 seconds late. We have surveillance now from a camera 2 buildings down. Someone was waiting in that alley. They struck him. They were moving him toward a second vehicle when he broke free and ran. He made it as far as the park before he collapsed." Danny stared at him. "He's 7, she said. "Yes, someone tried to take a 7-year-old. Yes, to get to you." Callum Vale's expression didn't change. "Yes." The restaurant was beautiful and quiet, and there was soft music from somewhere. And Danny was sitting across from a man who controlled half the criminal infrastructure of Montreal, and she thought, "This is the moment where I should make my excuses and leave, and never see any of these people again." She thought about Bastien's face in the car window. The way he'd said "you're her" like he'd been looking forward to it. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because," Callum Vale said, "the man who arranged it is someone within my organization, and I need to know who, and the only person who was present in that park who my people have not been able to account for." He paused. "Is someone who was with Bastien after it happened, when the men who took him would have expected him to still be unattended." Danny understood what he wasn't saying. "You think someone came back to check," she said, "or to finish it. And I was there. I think it's possible that whoever was watching that night saw your face," he said, "and I think they may now believe you saw theirs." Silence. "Did you?" he said. She thought about it. "The rain, the park, the shapes in the dark." "There was a man," she said slowly, "on the other side of the park, by the east entrance. He left when he heard me calling 911. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He was wearing," she paused, pulling it up, "a dark jacket, gray or navy. He had a phone out. He was on a call when he left." Callum Vale was very still. "Would you recognize him?" "Maybe," she said. "If I saw him again." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his wine glass, set it down again without drinking, and said, "I would like to move you to somewhere safer until this is resolved." "No. Ems Kowalski." "I have a job," she said. I have a life. I am not going to disappear into one of your safe houses because a man I might or might not recognize might or might not know who I am. Another recalibration. You are very difficult, he said. You're the second person to tell me that this week, she said. And the first one was my boss because I reorganized the condiment station. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Close enough. Then I would ask you, he said carefully, to allow me to have someone nearby. Discreetly. Discreetly, she repeated. You won't notice them. The last time you said that, 6 men surrounded me in a park. I was in a hurry then. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, Montreal moved past the restaurant windows, all wet streets and yellow headlights. Fine, she said, discreetly. She noticed them on the second day. Of course she did. She was a waitress who'd learned to read tables, who was about to complain about what, who was going to be a difficult split bill, who would order another round and who wouldn't, and reading the room was as natural to her as breathing. The man in the gray jacket who got coffee at the counter across from the diner every morning. The woman who jogged past her building at the same time each evening. Small details added up. She didn't say anything. She went to work. She came home. She reorganized the condiment station again because her boss had put it back wrong. On the 4th day, she was closing up, last one out, counting the float while the kitchen staff said their goodnights. When she heard the back door of the diner open, she looked up. The man was medium height, dark jacket. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from a wet Thursday night across a dark park. He had something in his hand. Danny did not panic. This was, she would later think, partly temperament and partly the fact that her brain went very, very fast in certain situations, and in the space of 2 seconds it clocked the following. The man was between her and the back door, but not between her and the service window to the kitchen, and the kitchen was not empty. And Bertrand, the line cook, weighed 220 pounds and had opinions about people who caused problems in his kitchen. She threw the cash drawer at the man's face. It hit him in the nose. He went sideways. She screamed. Not in fear, exactly, in strategy. Bertrand, someone's in the diner. And Bertrand erupted from the kitchen with the specific energy of a man whose kitchen had been disrespected. By the time Callum Vale's people came through the front door, which they did in approximately 11 seconds, the man in the dark jacket was on the floor with Bertrand's knee on his back, and Danny standing 3 feet away holding a metal napkin dispenser. Callum Vale came through the door 40 seconds after his men. He looked at the man on the floor. He looked at Danny. He looked at the napkin dispenser. I thought you said discreet, she said. I had people outside, he said, with the careful tone of someone making an important distinction. You were supposed to get to the outside. He came in the back. I know, your people didn't cover the back. A brief, controlled pause. I know. So really, this is your fault. Callum Vale looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. Then, unexpectedly, he said, Yes, it is. She lowered the napkin dispenser. The man on the floor, she found out later his name was Yves Deschênes, and he had been handling logistics for Callum Vale's organization for 6 years, was removed efficiently. Bertrand was spoken to by 2 very polite men who left him with a number to call and something in an envelope that made him look at it, look at them, and nod very slowly. Danny sat in a booth while the diner was cleared and Callum Vale sat across from her. You recognized him, he said. Yes, the park. He was the one I saw. He works for me. He said it flatly. Worked for how long? 6 years. Danny looked at her hands. That's a long time to be betrayed. He didn't answer that, but something moved in his face, something that wasn't the controlled, expensive stillness he wore everywhere else. He confirmed that the attempt on Bastien was arranged externally, he said. Someone who wanted leverage over me. Deschênes was paid to look away at the right moment and to come back and make sure no witnesses could identify him, she said. Yes, so that's done then. The external party will be handled. She looked at him. I don't want to know how. No, he said. You don't. The diner was quiet. The kitchen was empty. Somewhere outside, Montreal was being itself. Vast and cold and indifferent and beautiful in the specific way that cold, beautiful things are. Bastien asked me to tell you, Callum Vale said, and something shifted in his voice, that he's been practicing his spelling and he wants to show you his test when it comes back. Danny blinked. He wants to show me he's decided you're someone he trusts, he said. He doesn't do that easily. A pause. Neither do I. She looked at him for a long time. This is a very unusual job for a waitress from Verdun, she said. Is that where you're from? Grew up there. She pulled at a thread on her apron. My parents still live on Bannentine. My dad drives a city bus. My mom teaches kindergarten. She didn't know why she was telling him this. I'm nobody dangerous. You knocked a man sideways with a cash drawer, he said, and kept your head in a situation that would have incapacitated most people. I grew up with 3 older brothers. Something shifted again. Further this time. What are their names? Paul, Marek, and Tadek, short for Tadeusz, my grandmother's idea. She smiled despite herself. He's a teacher now. He hates when I tell people his full name. Callum Vale was quiet for a moment, then. My sister's name is Rosalind. She goes by Roz. She teaches violin at Concordia. That's very different from your line of work. Yes, he said, it is. The space between them in the booth felt different than it had in the restaurant. Less formal, like something had been lowered by degrees. I'd like to take you to dinner again, he said, not because of business. Danny looked at him. Your son told a stranger to accept your dinner invitation, based on the quality of your reservations, she said. Do you know that? That sounds exactly like him. He's very persuasive for a 7-year-old. He's been like that since he could talk, he said. His mother, he stopped. A brief, precise pause. He's always been that way. She didn't push on the pause. Some doors you don't open on a first dinner or a second. Okay, she said. He looked at her. To dinner, she clarified. Not because of business. Outside, it had started to rain again. Montreal being Montreal. Now, before we go any further, and I promise you there is further to go, I need you to do something for me. If you've been listening to this story and you felt that thing, that specific feeling when you're rooting for 2 people who have absolutely no business being in the same world, then you already know why we do this. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Ella's Romance Library if you haven't already, because there is so much more story to tell. The investigation resolved over the following 2 weeks in ways that Danny was given no details about and did not ask for. The external party, she learned later, accidentally, from an overheard conversation in a hallway she should not have been in, was a man named Thibault, who had believed that leverage over Callum Vale could be converted into territorial concessions in the port. He had been incorrect in this belief. He had been made to understand his error. What Danny focused on instead, Bastian's spelling test, which came back with a score of 19 out of 20, and was presented to her on a Saturday afternoon at a kitchen table. In an apartment she was not yet accustomed to, but was learning the shape of large windows, plant on the sill, the sound of Roz Vale playing a passage of something over and over in the next room until it was correct. Which one did you miss? She asked. Bastian pointed to necessary. I put 2 S's, he said with great seriousness. Everyone puts 2 S's, she said. There's a trick. 1 collar, 2 socks. 1 C, 2 S's. He stared at her. Who told you that? My grade 3 teacher. Madame Beaulieu. He mouthed the word, tested it, nodded slowly the way children nod when they've added something to an internal archive. I'll remember that, he said. From the doorway she didn't look up, but she felt Callum Vale watching them. He did that sometimes. Stood where he thought he was unobserved and watched his son like he was checking that Bastian was still real. She understood that impulse. She understood increasingly a lot about Callum Vale that she hadn't expected to. The way he listened, completely, unhurriedly, the way people don't listen anymore. The way he treated the housekeeper and the drivers with the same precise courtesy he extended to everyone, neither more nor less. The way he was soft, specifically and only for Bastian. Not weak, not indulgent, but genuinely, visibly soft in a way that she thought he was probably not aware how clearly it showed. She didn't know yet what this was. She didn't try to name it. She just sat at his kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, helping his son practice spelling, while rain hit the windows of a building in Outremont, and Roz Vale played the same 8 bars of something over and over next door, until she finally, definitively, got it right. Months later, 5 to be approximate, Danny Kowalski was no longer a waitress at the diner on Saint-Denis. She had gone back to school. She was finishing the nursing program she had abandoned 3 years ago, working weekends, spending the rest of her time in the careful and complicated business of being someone who mattered to Callum Vale. She had not moved in. She had not made any declarations. She was Danny Kowalski from Verdun, whose dad drove a city bus and whose mom taught kindergarten. And she was going to be a nurse, and those things were not in conflict with anything else that had happened to her. Bastian could now spell necessary, Wednesday, February, and necessary again for practice. He had developed a habit of sending her voice notes on the family phone plan he had been enrolled in, usually to report on spelling tests or to share observations about his classmates, delivered with the gravity of a correspondent filing from the field. One evening in February, Bastian could spell that now. Danny was walking home from her clinical placement when Callum Vale fell into step beside her. He did this sometimes, appeared. He was a man who moved very quietly for his size. "You passed?" he said. She had texted him. "Highest in my cohort. Of course you did, don't say of course. It was hard." "It was hard," he agreed. "You did it anyway." She looked at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead, the way he often did in public, face forward, entirely aware of everything around him, unreadable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. She was paying close attention. "Bastian wants to know," he said, "if you'd like to have dinner on Sunday." "Is that Bastian asking or you asking?" "Bastian," he said, "wants steak. I want to ask you something." She stopped walking. He stopped. He faced her on the winter sidewalk, breath visible in the cold air, and she thought again, as she had in a park in the rain, as she had in a hospital corridor, as she had in a restaurant booth, that she had not expected any of this. Not one part of it. "I am not," he said, with the careful deliberateness of a man composing each word with full awareness. "A simple person to be near. You know what I am, you've seen what that means." "Yes, I cannot promise you uncomplicated, I know. But I can," he said, "promise you that nothing will come near you, or anyone you love." He paused. "And I can promise you that I will be someone who listens, and who shows up." Another pause. "And who lets Bastian send you 17 voice messages about his spelling tests." Danny looked at him for a long time. 17 is a lot," she said. "He's enthusiastic." "He is." The February air was cold and the street was lit amber from the streetlights, and somewhere down the block someone had left their Christmas lights up and they blinked steadily in the dark. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "To all of it," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. All the way this time. An actual smile, unfamiliar on that face, like a door opened in a wall you'd started to believe was solid. He offered her his arm. Old-fashioned. She took it. They walked. And that, if you're asking what happened to a 22-year-old waitress who found a child in the rain and made one phone call on a Thursday night that changed everything, that's your answer. She didn't choose the world she stepped into. She just made the right call. Literally. Bastian is in the 2nd grade now. He can spell necessary, February, Wednesday, and recently perseverance, because Danny taught him a trick for that one too. Callum Vale keeps his promises. And Danny Kowalski is going to be a very good nurse. If this story got you somewhere, if you felt something in that park scene, or that diner, or that February sidewalk, then let me know in the comments. Tell me your favorite moment. Tell me if you want to know more about Roz, because I have a feeling about Roz. Like this video. Subscribe to Ella's Romance Library, and I'll see you in the next story.